Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Good evening. Welcome to Cota Access. Good morning, Samad. We're really excited to host you as part of our regular series of webinars with amazing entrepreneurs, executives, and thought leaders. I've had the opportunity to know you for the past 18 months as CEO of Cota's portfolio company, Glow, but many of the participants in our audience don't know you. So can you take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself and your background prior to starting our conversation? And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Ben Malka. I'm one of the managers of Cota FinTech Ventures, along with Kevin Jacks. We invest specifically in the financial technology space and have a portfolio we're building as part of Cota Capital. So Samad, take it away.
Thank you so much, Ben, for having me. My background is product engineering. I've been fortunate enough to, be a part of many startups. I kind of got addicted to the startup journey. I remember my very first job was at Intel, and sitting in a cubicle, kind of not feeling like I had much impact. I kind of tripped over joining a startup called Carillion. And that was a wild ride for me. I remember sleeping in the server rooms, maintaining the servers, all the way through when they actually IPO'd and sold to check free. And since then, I haven't looked back. I've been a part of multiple teams. I was part of the founding team at a company called VeloCell. It was a supply chain SaaS company. Later, we sold that to TIBCO. I've started multiple companies, and most of it has been in heavy tech, SaaS platform developer tools. And now I'm really excited to tackle what I think is a very big problem and tech-enable the small business insurance market. And it's great to kind of work with you on this, Ben.
Great, thanks. So the title of today's webinar is Cracking the Code of Serving SMBs. And so I thought it would be helpful to start the conversation with a straightforward question that doesn't maybe have a straightforward answer, but what makes serving SMBs so difficult?
That's a really good question. But before I jump into it, let's kind of set the context. SMB is such a broad topic. You can think of companies that have no employees. There's about 27 million businesses in the US with no employees. And I consider that micro businesses. When you think of businesses with 1 to 100 employees, that's typically the definition of SMB. And I'm going to focus on that part of the market is, 2 to 100, 3 to 100 employees type of a size. And I'm also not going to focus on like marketing 101, brand 101. I just want to focus on small businesses, especially small business owners who are making meaningful purchases. So a few $1,000s or more, not hundreds of dollars. And when you think about these businesses, I think they have real business needs, these small business owners. But when they're making a meaningful purchase, most oftentimes they want a human in the process. But they have consumer-like attention spans. And really the biggest problem is they have consumer-like economics. And so the big challenge is, how do you build a sustainable go-to-market strategy in this market when you have these dynamics?
Great. So you brought up a whole host of issues there, and let's try to break them down and talk about them individually and see if we can summarize them towards the end. One of the challenges you mentioned is the complexity of finding your target market and the techniques and tools that you use to do that. So maybe we can start with that.
Sure. I think when you're thinking about small businesses, small business owners, one of the hardest things is to reach the small business owner. And I think the standard approach to marketing is who and when, right? Like, who do I reach out to and when do I reach out to them? And even at Glow, we started with experimenting early with Facebook. Naturally, you know, why not spend ads on Facebook and see if we can reach the small business owners? Facebook has been pretty effective in reaching consumers. Small business owners tend to buy like consumers. But we quickly realized that Facebook wasn't so great. They have lookalike techniques, but they don't have as much detailed depth information about businesses as we thought. Even Google keywords, which is kind of helps answer the when. So if somebody's searching for a refrigerator, clearly they're in market for a refrigerator. But that became very not effective, right? Like it's very expensive to go put keywords and search for them. And there's many techniques you can use, but at the end of the day, it's not a sustainable approach. And so, our conclusion was that if we're really going to make this cost effective, we have to build our own data set. We have to find a way to collect enough information about businesses so that we could do the targeting ourselves. And after learning about, outsourcing your kind of top of funnel to a Google or Facebook or a partner, you lose some of that sustainable, cost-effective advantage over time. And at least I believe very strongly that you have to bring that in-house.
So Samad, that sounds like an enormous task, building your own data set. How do you go about doing that?
It is a big task. You have to, it's not just, hey, look, I'm going to go build a data set. I think you have to take a long-term view in this and think about it from an architectural perspective. It's not, hey, I want to just build a data warehouse. The way we approached it was think of the life cycle of your data. You have multiple sources that you may collect information from. You have Secretary of State. That's relatively easy to go purchase the data set from the Secretary of State directly. But one of the problems you'll hit right away is their legal names. Unfortunately, businesses file their legal names at the state level, but then they file their DBAs at the county level. Yet the whole world of public information about the business on the web is based on their DBAs most of the time, not their legal names. So one of the biggest challenges we had was entity resolution. How do you connect the dots and connect them together? You also have to think about how do you refresh the data. So imagine you have a data set with multiple sources that are coming in. The data changes every year, every so often the sources get updated and change. So you have to think about what your refresh rules are and how are you bringing that data in? How are you potentially creating one core profile that you allow certain data to come into at a certain level? And then the other thing you have to think about is, what if you are engaged with the customer, now they give you conflicting data or updated data? Does the data you collect from the customer directly take priority over the data from, let's say, Yelp? And so you have to kind of think about building those rules in the system. But above all, you also have to think about this data set as its own sales funnel as well. So it's before a lead even gets created, you have to think about all the stages that the data has to go through. The more you can keep it acyclical, meaning all the way down to maybe a lead. You maybe start with a higher level prospect and you start working it through the stages. And every stage you go through, you have to have rules that say, hey, look, once I am able to get their DBA, once I'm able to get contact information, I'm going to keep moving it down the stages. And you have to kind of take that level of discipline around your data and build that level of architecture up front. Otherwise, you may not be able to take full advantage of it.
So now that you've got a proprietary data set, tell us more about product-led growth and what that means to you.
So you can't just say, hey, look, I have a great data. The next set of questions, well, how do you leverage that data and how do you use it to reach your prospects, your leads? And, you know, I think when you are selling a product to the small business owner, which is a meaningful price point, in most cases, you definitely need a sales force if it's a few $1,000s or more that they're buying. Say they buy a product that's worth $10,000. I think what a lot of companies may make a mistake is, let me just go purchase a CRM, let me have a sales force and, you know, have 4 or 5 stages in my sales process and let me start selling. I think that's a mistake because you don't get to build repeatability in that process and you don't get to build learnings and scale. The approach that I think product-led growth has really shown over the last decade is they've heavily instrumented the sales funnel. So if you look at any company that has a self-service product online, every single page is heavily instrumented. They run lots of experiments to know what messaging, what order of the sales process gets the best conversion rates. And so when you have a human-driven sales process, I think relying on traditional sales tools is a mistake. And so one thing we've done is we've tried to automate and build a sales process that's very repeatable. Hence, we are taking full control of the sales experience and instrumenting every single step of that process so we can run experiments and constantly improve and automate the learnings from that process, right?
So tell us a bit about what an experiment means in a human-driven sales process.
There's so many, but I can give you one example. We talked about reaching a decision maker is very hard, right? So if I own a restaurant and most of the time I'm spending just running my business. I'm not sitting behind a desk waiting for people to reach me or call me. And frankly, email, they don't have time for looking and responding to email. They're incredibly busy people. So reaching them is so critical. When you reach them is one variable, how often you dial. Say if you're doing an outbound call, there's a lot of variables that you have to think about. Okay, I have 3 numbers for them. Which one do I call? What time do I call? What is my connection rate, and when have I reached them before? Is their business open during that time when I'm calling? Is this the right time to call? Is lunchtime the best time to call a restaurant business owner? And so what we've done, because we've instrumented every single step of the process, we've created a set of rules that drive which phone number you call and when you call. So our salespeople, for example, don't really make those decisions. The system makes it for them. So hence we can run A/B experiments with different parameters to see which ones are effective for what segment or persona of customer. And that allows us to really drive better conversion rates. And we've seen significant improvements by running those types of experimentations and taking at least the human decision, i.e. salesperson's decision of who to call, when to call, out of the process. And that's what I mean by product-led growth for a Salesforce-driven team. Right?
So as a byproduct of the product-led growth view, it strikes me that you have incredible process control, measurement, and analysis in what you're doing. And I wonder if you could talk about the tools you use there and anything that comes to mind in terms of insights.
Yeah, I think I think anytime you bring a human into the mix, i.e. salespeople, they're great at certain things, but sometimes it's very difficult to adhere them to certain process. Even dispositioning a phone call correctly is a big challenge. And if you don't have good data, the experiments you run and the learnings you have isn't very effective. And so what we've done, when I say we've taken control of the user experience for our salespeople, is we've built our own CRM on top of our data that controls every step of the process. And because we felt the cost of the CAC is so critical, we had to drive automation and efficiency at every stage of the process. We had to, every, let's say, click counts, right? So if the let's say a salesperson makes that click 10 times a day, and over a year, it takes them a minute every time they make that click, and they're looking at two different systems, bringing data in, that's a lot of inefficiency. And so what we think is not only do you need to have a strong data set that allows you to manage who you reach out to when, but you also have to have a very set up platform that lets you take advantage of that data by automating the full sales process. Even if it's a human driving it, you have to instrument it heavily and kind of build a very tailored sales process around how you sell your product to your customers, so you can drive automation and efficiency from it. Right?
And does that have implications for cross-sell and retention?
Absolutely. I mean, everybody knows the more information you learn about your customers, the better you can serve them. And part of kind of the strategy, I think, that makes most sense when you're selling to small businesses is you have to take a productized approach in your sales process, right? And so when again, going back to product-led growth, I think every part of the sales process, you have to think of it as a product. And the more data you get, you can then trigger follow-up rules on how you want to cross-sell them, how do you want to upsell. But even more important, it's all the lost opportunities that you want to maybe cultivate for a follow-up conversation in a year from now. And the reason they got lost is pretty significant. Where they got lost in your sales funnel matters. All of that can then be instrumented with good opportunities of follow-up and automation. So it's not just, hey, look, I've learned more about the customer, I'm going to trigger new automations to cross-sell or upsell them. But I'm also, if I lost them during certain parts of the funnel, I want to trigger automations to not only update my data set and learn from it, but how am I going to apply that to future campaigns when I follow up with them?
Got it. Can you talk us through examples of how you've actually captured the data and then leveraged it for future relationship building?
Yeah, I think one of the things, I know we talked a lot about, I know there's a lot of buzz around AI. And I'm going to answer your question, but the foundational thing that I believe, if you don't build the foundation for AI, AI is not going to be effective. And the first step of that is the data you have and how you leverage the data. And so a lot of SMB is, how do you reach the DM, and when do you reach the DM, and what's the right message that's going to create the right conversion for that DM. So creating personas, and what I kind of keep talking our internal team is the next action. And think of it as is the next action AI, or the next action, what is the right thing to do next? And so a lot of that is, one example is, we find that when we have had a conversation with a decision maker, that's very critical to note down when that conversation happened, and what phone number that conversation happened in, at what stage in that funnel that conversation happened in, and what was the results of that conversation. All that data gets fed in to how we decide what the next action is. And if you have that kind of instrumentation, and if you have that kind of data, then you can really feed into what is the next action you need to take. Because I think that's really what comes down to it, is reaching, again, in the world of SMB, I think it's how do you reach that decision maker, that business owner who's hustling out there, and when is the right time to reach them, and what's the right message to reach them in. And I'm keeping it somewhat generic, but that's the information we're leveraging to just make it smarter, for us at least.
In listening to what you're saying, I'm hearing this wonderful combination of like very specific data capture and process control and analysis, and at the same time leveraging the human side of relationship building and selling and product information. Is that how you think of the world?
I do. I think a lot of times when you're building systems, you kind of think about, at least the best practice, the way we think about it is self-service is the optimal process you want to get to. But what I learned is that the human assisted sales funnel or sales process is what makes most sense for an SMB who is making a meaningful purchase online. So yes, you can build self-service if that's the way they want, but most tend to want to talk to a person. And so how do you build a platform that allows that? Think of it as a handoff between self-service to human, to back to self-service to human. So imagine you have a website where they're going through a sales process. We could talk about insurance because that's the world I'm in, but they are going through buying an insurance and they drop off the funnel. Maybe they drop off when they have to enter some information or they got distracted. Now that is a smooth transition to an internal sales flow. The salesperson picks up the call, gets them back online, moves them forward a couple of steps, and then drops off again. Maybe then the customer goes online, does a couple of more steps. So it's the sales assist flow that I think you have to architect from the ground up. You don't get this by default. So if you build a full self-service flow and you neglect to think of the human in the flow, and you think you're going to use some CRM to do it, you're going to have a lot of inefficiencies and you're not going to have that smooth user experience. So you have to think of it not just as a customer experience, you also have to think of it as the salesperson experience. And when you're designing a system, you have to take both into account. Otherwise, you're only solving half the problem. And so for us, the sales journey is as important as the customer's journey to really build the fully automated system we want to, have a huge sustainable advantage when it comes to cost efficiency for SMB. Right?
How do you think about the qualities on the sales team side that allow your team and teams like yours to connect with their customers? What are you looking for? What do you think really distinguishes people?
Well, that's a great question. I think we have this conversation a lot is that, and I think salespeople also hate to waste time, right? Like if they're filling out forms and doing non-critical activities, which is having conversations with customers, selling, it's a problem. And I want to, before I answer that question, I want to just talk about, the industry average, I think, is like 3 hours talk time at max, right? And it was even hard for us to get even close to that.
So that's 3 hours per day per salesperson,
Per
8 hours a
day
day.
per salesman, right? Like, so majority of their day is all wasted activities, right? And even for us, it was hard to get to that number. And we still have a challenge because there's so many things in the sales process that the human can do that is inefficient and not automated. And so I think the way I look at it is we got to get rid of all of those. The most, my ideal situation is you're having as many meaningful conversations as possible, and the system enables you to do that. And so when we think about hiring individuals, especially in our team, in our flow, and knowing that we're going after SMB, you just have to understand we're not hiring enterprise sales reps, right? So we're hiring younger, earlier in their career salespeople, but we're looking for individuals who are impatient when they are distracted with other systems and want to be talking to customers and want to be advising them, helping them, and selling our products to them. And so I think at the end, that is our ultimate goal, is to increase that metric as significantly as possible.
Great. I think it's worth exploring models out there that you think are succeeding in the SMB world. So as you look at the landscape, where do you call out examples that you think really have pushed the boundaries of thinking through these issues?
I think that there are many companies that have successfully reached SMB and solved them, but they've all had their own unique techniques. And the ones who I believe have had a sustainable advantage have been able to solve the top of funnel in a significant way. And so, I mean, take example for Yelp, right? They're one of the largest marketplaces for small businesses, yet they have a massive sales force. You would imagine they could do everything self-service, but they couldn't. And to the point where I remember talking to some individuals where they would have feet in the ground. So when they launched a market, restaurants, they would hire field salespeople because they knew going in and talking and giving that personal communication to a restaurant owner was really critical. And so they realized human interactions was very, very important to them. And so I think, but they had the data set. They knew who they needed to reach out to because they were able to invest and get customers into their platform. And then they built a sales force and automated it to make sure and build great training programs to make sure that they could have those conversations. So I think those would be the type of examples I look at, is the businesses who have sustainably solved top of funnel are the ones who are going to have a future advantage. If they outsource top of funnel, I think they do not have a sustainable advantage. And that's why we're investing.
So now you brought in what is a somewhat controversial view here. I'd love to hear you talk more about that. Do channels and partnerships matter? If you have to own the front end, then maybe you have to do it yourself. You can't leverage anybody else. Or is that not what you mean?
So look, I think insurance even has a wonderful concept around embedded insurance. It makes sense for certain products. If you're selling travel insurance, you want to be embedded in the flow of buying airline tickets, or similar to phone warranties. But when you're thinking commercial, there aren't very good examples. You can come up with 1,000 reasons, but when a person signs up their legal Zoom and sets up a business, the evidence of them buying insurance isn't very high, or finding that embedded process requires a lot of experimentations. You may find a perfect partner, and it may be a good beachhead, but it's not a sustainable advantage. And so what I take away from SMB is you have to do the foundational work first, and partnerships is a great scale. With partnerships, you still need a sales. If you have a meaningful revenue side, if you have a meaningful product that has a meaningful cost, you're going to need a sales force anyway. So my point of view is, do the hard thing first. You kind of have to go direct. You have to build the systems. You have to build the infrastructure and the platform to create cost effectiveness. And then you can layer in a lot of techniques that drive efficiencies, including scaling with partners, and including doing content marketing and bringing in inbound. And there's a lot of techniques, a lot of approaches, but at the end, if you don't do the foundational work of taking ownership of your top of funnel, I think you don't have a sustainable advantage.
So is there any other advice you can provide to the broader audience around what it takes to serve the SMB community well?
Yes. Number one, reaching the decision maker is everything when it comes to SMB. Getting a hold of them is everything, and knowing how they buy is super critical. So at least through my experimentation, a SMS, a phone call has pretty high advantages. Direct mail is another good advantage, but there's, again, lots of techniques of optimizing that funnel. But I think if you're building this out, the learnings you can have by just picking up a phone and talking to them, there's no other channel that will give you that kind of learning. So number one is you got to know that reaching that decision maker is everything. Number two is, like I've mentioned over and over again, you have to build your own data set. There's very little data about SMBs online, or you can't go into Duns and Bradstreet and buy very rich information about small businesses. There's a lot of failure rate in small businesses. Their data is constantly changing. They're constantly evolving. So whatever you get is probably stale very quickly. So you kind of have to invest in building that. Do the hard work first, build that data set first. And then the third we talked a lot about is build a platform that instruments and automates every step of the process, so that you can then take the learnings and automate those learnings so that you can build repeatability and growth. Again, if you don't do that hard work up front, I think the CAC can quickly run away from you. And so all of this from my experimentation is CAC, cost of acquisition has to be very much first in mind when you're doing anything, and kind of taking control of your top of funnel, building the data set, building the platform, gives you the most ability to own your own destiny and build that sustainable business model. Right?
And as you reflect back on all of your years in this entrepreneurial journey you've had, what have been some of the strongest influences and some specific moments that have shaped your view?
I think the the biggest thing is don't shy away from doing the hard work up front and doing the hard problem first. Solving, I think that's the biggest learning I've had is if it's hard, it means no one else has solved it. So go tackle it head on and do the hard thing. If you can solve the hard problem, then you have a sustainable advantage. And so pretty much what I've learned from my experiences, go do the hard thing and do the detailed work behind it to make it work. Right.
Were there moments or examples where all this crystallized, like specific failures you were involved in or successes?
I think we'd be here for a long time about if we discussed every single failure. I mean, that's the other thing. I think failure is a constant. If you're not failing, you're not learning. But let me give an example. I think just even at Glow, we started with building a really beautiful self-service flow that was mobile friendly, gorgeous, every step of the process with beautiful little animations. We went and hired an illustrator that built custom animations for us and custom and we even spent a lot of money building a nice little video that could had wonderful sound, and we spent a lot of time and money doing what we thought was going to help us win, which is let's build a self-service flow. Let's build a lot of beautiful brand. Let's build beautiful videos. Let's put it out there on Facebook and Google, and let's run growth marketing techniques and get someone to go through our flow. And we quickly realized that the CAC was way out of order. And unfortunately, a lot of companies keep doubling down, hoping they'll get a better CAC, but it doesn't work. And so we learned very quickly that, wow, we spent a significant amount of capital prepping for what we thought would be a successful channel for us, and it didn't work. And so I think my big thing is don't overinvest on experiments. Keep them very, very low cost, very quick. Find the quickest and easiest way to know if a channel is going to work for you way in advance. And I wish we would have done that in the past, but we made some of those mistakes ourselves.
I've heard that sometimes referred to as incrementalism. You tweak around the edges rather than take a bold bet.
You tweak around the edges rather than taking a whole bet is a good point. It is harder. Entrepreneurialism is also a lot around conviction. And so balancing that game of hey, we want to build something that's completely self-service, and then realizing after the fact that it's not 100% self-service, it's human enabled. And so now if it's human enabled, how do we make it cost effective? It's a different problem set, but you have to kind of go through that process of learning and learn from your mistakes.
Got it. I'll give a great example from my background on one of those aha moments that I think is reinforced by what you're doing. So I once sat in a call center of a company selling technology into the restaurant space. And I pulled the CEO aside and I said, how do you know when you have a great profile for a salesperson? And the CEO shared, he said, it's not what you'd think. It doesn't require a whole lot of selling experience. I actually just need young, talkative people who've worked in a restaurant so they can empathize with the owner on the problems they're facing every day.
That's true. That's phenomenal.
Is that what you're finding as well?
Absolutely. It's it's individuals that have that raw sales capability who want to have those conversations is super critical. And it is that selling to SMB is a grind. Like there's no sugarcoating it, right? If you want to, especially in financial services, where the small business owner may be buying, let's say, a $10,000 insurance product, or signing up for a $50,000 small business loan, and your revenue is a fraction of that, right? So the buyer has certain expectations on a sales journey, but your costs can't afford to give them, a $200,000 sales rep, right? That's also something you have to fully consider, is the buyer has a certain expectation based on what they're buying and what your revenue can really make. Whatever your revenue can cost effectively allow you to deliver is very distinctly different. So hiring for SMB, you're forced to kind of hire the younger and people who just have that strong work ethic and are not afraid of the phone, and because that's what it's going to take at the end of the day.
You touched on it there, but how closely do you monitor kind of the LTV to CAC ratio of the selling efforts that you have?
What we realized is it's the smaller conversion rates that matter, because it's easier. You're right. Like, we want to look at net revenue retention. We want to look at the CAC, sales efficiency, etc. But it's hard to impact those higher level metrics. What we look at is connection rate. We look at your ability to reach a DM. We look at, hey, what's your conversion rate to getting them interested, etc. We're looking at micro stage conversion rates versus overall conversion rates, because those are ones we can effectively impact through experimentation and gives us a immediate result. So it's unfortunate, the difficulty, again, when I talk about the hard things, is we're looking at hundreds of metrics versus one overall metric, because the hundreds of metrics is what we can improve. And a lot of times it's sales behavior. So focusing on which metric matters, and then focusing on the behavior of the person and coaching them towards that behavior, that's another learning experiment. So as a product individual, I never really put into mind that, oh yeah, we have humans and behavior is a very difficult thing to coach on humans, especially when they're earlier in their career. And so, and there's no substitute for a good sales coach, right? Like you have to understand, like, that's another big learning experience I've had, is just because you tell them to do something, it doesn't mean they'll do it. And just because you've automated it and built every step in the way, at the end of the day, you're still dealing with humans, and you just need to make sure that those things are super critical. They need coaching. They need to be, they need behavioral adjustments, and you can automate and systemize it to help your coach, but you can't just immediately replace them.
Okay. So I'm going to end on one final question, which I'm curious as to hear your answer. So do you keep them all in the same room on a sales floor, or do you allow them to work remotely?
I think we were forced to start remote, right? And we found ourselves, again, I focus on a startup conversation. As a startup, there's 1,000 variables that are going to kill you any one moment. And all the variables you can control, you should try to control. And I found myself building a lot of tools and technology and systems, trying to be good at remote. And that's not my core competency, right? Like that's not what I wanted to spend my energy and our team's energy doing. And so we've actually pivoted pretty significantly and are going all on site because of what I just said, those human behaviors, those coaching moments. I don't think there's, I don't think you can really substitute getting in there, working with your team, helping them, listening to them, taking them aside, kind of psychologically building them up, motivating them. Doing that over remote is just impossible. And so we've realized that that we need to go all on site, and not in a hybrid way. We're being a little Machiavellian about this, and I think that's going to work for us.
Samad, thank you for your time this morning. We very much appreciate you sharing your wisdom and insights. I appreciate everybody's participation from the broader Cota Capital community. If anybody wants to follow up with either Samad or I, our contact information is available, and we'll be posting the webinar online for people to link through it if they want to refer to anybody else, or if they just want to review some of the conversation that we've had. I'm going to end by thanking everybody and posting the obligatory disclosures, which are here for you to read. And Samad, once more, thank you for everything you do for Cota and for Glow.
Thank you so much for having me, Ben. Really appreciate it.